Hey guys, welcome to the first ROC Poetry podcast. It's a community-run podcast, so welcome, welcome to the community. Today we've got the head admin of the ROC Poetry subreddit and the attached Discord, Gnozle. Welcome, Gnozle. Woo, yay!
Hey, how you doing?
And we also have a guest from Melbourne spoken word, which is local to me. So it's good crossover for me, Ben, who's waking up after the World Cup. So he's making himself a coffee and then he'll be on. And we might have a couple guests drop in and out from the subreddit and the Discord, but mostly the Discord because this is a voice chat. So that'll be good. Announcements. We don't have any announcements at the moment. we did just hit 1K registered users to the Discord.
The subreddit is at, I think, nearing 25K subscribers.
And these are just people who have joined. They're not active, but they're there. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. I joined ROC Poetry years ago, maybe like 5 years ago or something.
Oh, the subreddit? Yeah.
And the Discord. And when I joined, it was a bunch of different people to who's in here now. But it was the same
quite
sort
a
of
rotation
thing.
of people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you've got something that's going on for that long, and something that's community driven, not like it's not anyone's job to be here. So there's a lot of flow through and a lot of rotation.
Yeah, definitely.
But it still feels like the same community that it did back then. I did leave for a bit because I was like, oh, I can't be a poet. I gotta make money. I gotta go to work.
Yeah, definitely.
But that didn't work out too
real
well.
life, man.
So, Gnozle, head admin.
Yeah.
How did it come about? Tell us the story of creation.
The birth of the subreddit. It was initially just a branch off of the poetry subreddit, which I don't know how long that's been around, but r/poetry moderators basically wanted to separate all the people posting their own poems and then have the main subreddit be for published poems and poetry news and general poetry stuff.
Yeah. So one for like poetry meta, and then one for sharing poetry that you've written.
Yeah, exactly.
So were you a mod of the original poetry server?
No, I wasn't. I was just an active user, and basically, I think what was happening is those original moderators were just getting kind of fed up with all of it, and they didn't have the time to moderate anymore, and so they just selected the most active users, which I don't remember who it was. It was me, a user named Gurgrir, and then I don't know the names of the other two. They've long since left as well. I think I'm the only original mod still around.
Hey Ben, welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, not too bad.
Hey, hello.
And Estes, who's from the server as well. Now let me just do a little background stuff here. I need to turn Ben down.
Wait 1 sec. I just got to check what audio devices I'm using.
Oh, good. So we were just talking about the subreddit that this podcast is centered around, and the Discord server that this is centered around.
Yeah.
Gnozle was telling us how it was originally the poetry subreddit. They wanted to have a place where people could post their own poems rather than like poem meta.
Mm-hmm.
And so Gnozle took it upon himself to create that, and he's been going strong ever since. Now the other
Cool.
person we've got in here is Astiz. How do you pronounce that?
Asties.
Astiz,
Yes.
who's been fairly what's the word I'm looking for? Active in the Discord. See him post some pieces every now and then. And we're gonna
Yeah, but
ask him about
I
his.
was active the last month. But the last few weeks I'm not there, I guess.
Yeah, I've taken a bit of time off as well. We're gonna ask him about like his poetry background, because the idea is that we'll have people from the community, from the subreddit and the Discord in to
Mm-hmm.
talk about their poetry history and all that sort of stuff. But back to Gnozle.
Cool.
So
Oh,
you create the subreddit.
yes.
What do you think most people come to it for? Like, why do you think people come across it? Do you think they're searching for somewhere just to share, or are they looking to improve their skills?
Yeah, I think primarily it's to share, right? I think
Yeah,
the demographic, especially the Reddit demographic, is veers towards teenagers or young 20s. So you get a lot of people that mostly just want to share. That's been one of the main difficulties in trying to steer it more towards a workshop, like an improvement for people to improve. And
yeah, definitely. Well, so Ben, when I first started getting serious about poetry, sounds stupid to say, Ben runs Melbourne Spoken Word, and one of the things that they put on weekly is a workshop. So I used to travel 2 hours into the city to get something workshopped, and sometimes I wouldn't really have anything or anything like that. It was super helpful because it's a live workshop with real people. A lot of them are active in the community. So that's how I was workshopping a lot of my stuff. But then I found this server, and it's just so much easier to maybe wait a day until I get critique rather than travel in and out of the city for a
yeah,
like 50-word piece or something like that, like a 150-word piece. And I found it really good for workshopping, because you get a wide spread of people, and there is a lot of people who, they're just here to share their stuff and to read what other people are putting out, not so much to improve or critique, but just to be a part of the community. And so it can get a little bit frustrating when you post in workshop and like you don't get feedback. But I find if you wait around enough, and like you're active when the people who you like to receive feedback of are also active, then it's just as good as going to a face-to-face workshop, because in the end it is just people, like, and some of them are more trained, some of them less. So that's what I use it for. I also use it for sharing and a bit of a notepad. I see people getting angry at me because I just spam it up sometimes, but it's like working through it. So the Discord.
yeah.
I forgot what I had a question like lined up, and I've forgotten it. Oh well. But while we're talking about the range of people who come on, Astiz, how long have you been writing poetry for? Astiz?
Yeah. I have been writing poetry since. Well, seriously, I've been seriously writing poetry for a year.
Yeah.
but I have basically been writing poetry was 14. 14. When I was 14, I wrote my first poem, like first poem ever in my life. And basically, what I did is I just wrote random sentences and rhymed all of them with ly. So
Yeah.
environmentally, ecologically, pretty basic stuff because I never written anything before that. It's a cringe worthy poem.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the
And
first that you write.
yeah, and after that, that around that year I wrote 3 or 4 more poems, and then I did not write anything till I was 19. So 19, that's when I was in college,
Yeah.
English literature, and there's
Yeah.
this
So you were
subject called,
studying English literature when you decided
yeah.
to take it a little more seriously and start thinking more about the poetry that you were writing.
I was yeah, yeah. I mean, I was already in literature. I joined the bachelor's in English literature when I was 18, when I was 17 and a half, and I just recently passed out of the course.
Oh,
So
okay.
we used to have this subject called History of English Literature, and it was pretty boring. So just to drive the boredom away, I started writing poetry. And then we had a lot of inter-college competitions where we would go to other colleges and compete with them, and there would be poetry
Oh, okay.
and other writing competitions. There were other competitions as well, like speaking, dancing, singing, and I just figured out that writing poetry was something attractive. Like any college I would go, anywhere I would go, the only thing I would like to compete in was
Was the
poetry.
poetry?
And yeah, and that's when I decided that maybe I should take this seriously. Maybe I should do my research, start reading more poems. And that's when. So it's been a year since I've been seriously reading poetry, like properly understanding stuff.
Do you think that that studying English literature uh, added? Do you think that was like? Do you think it makes you a better poet coming from that background?
It definitely does because it gives you the um, critical background. Yeah, because in a literature classroom you are taught to think critically about the text rather than just merely read it for the sake of it being a classic.
Okay.
I don't know how other classes work, but my teacher, one of the teacher, basically always told to question the text. Why should it be read, and what is the purpose of it? So unless you have a personal connection to the text, it would not work properly for you as a reader.
Yeah.
So every time I write a poem, that is something I have in mind. So if I'm writing a poem, the first thing that I ask myself is that why am I writing? What is the,
The
like, there are
intent,
so many poems already in the market. So what am I
definitely.
doing different? What am I doing different? So that every poem that I write, I that is the main intent, to do something different.
Yeah. Um. So, Astiz is just sort of like one of the regulars on the Discord. So with his background in literature and the way that he looks at things, sort of more critically than someone who's just there to share their pieces, um, he's a good source of feedback sometimes. Um, well, like a lot of the time. And if you are just in the Discord to share what you have, then of course people are respectful of that. But if you're someone who wants some feedback, maybe Estee's studying literature and all that, maybe he has the feedback for you, if you know what I mean. Maybe he's got the thing that you need.
Definitely. I am always ready to help. I was
Yeah.
just busy these few weeks trying to get into another college for my master's degree, which I still have not. But
Okay, you're going back for
I'll
the
be
masters.
pretty
Nice.
more. Yeah, I have not yet. I have not gotten any admissions yet. But I'll be pretty active from now on. I mean,
Cool.
I just opened the app after 2 weeks, I think, and I
Yeah.
found that this is
I've seen
happening.
you around. Well, thanks for that, Estes. As always, anyone who wants to come in can chat to us on the Discord. Links will be in the description. But we should move on to our outside guest, someone from outside the community. Ben, Blood and Barricades. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm good. How are you? It's a bit
Yeah.
weird having my gamer tag associated with poetry, but there we go.
Oh yeah. Well, it's because we're on Discord, it's just a lot easier.
Yeah.
What have you been up to?
One.
Oh yeah, sorry, Steve, go.
So once Blood Barricades, once the interview with him is over, can I ask him questions after your questions are over?
You can ask him questions as we go, but try not to butt in.
No. I won't interrupt. Once it is over, I'll join in.
Okay, cool. Fair enough.
I'll just listen. Yeah, okay.
So Ben, what do you do?
What do I do?
Yeah.
I do a whole range of things under the banner of Melbourne Spoken Word, but the basic idea is to champion and kind of grow the art form of spoken word and like live poetry in Melbourne and kind of a little bit Greater Victoria now as well. We support a bunch of country gigs, but the whole thing started as a way or a online portal to promote all of the kind of live poetry gigs and open mics and stuff going on around Melbourne. And then from that, we've kind of branched out. We run a festival now. We tour international spoken word artists. We run workshops. The website has reviews and interviews. We run a YouTube channel. I'm sure there's a bunch of things we're forgetting. We have a podcast. We have like an online audio journal, like a regular album of poetry called Audacious.
Yep.
And
my copy. So how I was explaining it to Gnozle before, like in pre-show, was you're sort of like a network or or like a brand, but that's a bit of a strong word. And so you promote gigs under the guise of Melbourne Spoken Word. And and so if people are looking for a gig around Melbourne, they can come to you and you can be like, oh, over here we've got this happening on this day, or a different gig happening on this day.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also organise your own gigs, like the Melbourne Spoken Word Prize.
Yeah.
Which is a yearly prize for slam poets.
Yeah, $1,000 we give away, which is not that bad amount of money for poetry. $1,000, especially given we're not like an official arts organization yet. We don't have any like government funding, so $1,000 is a lot of money to give away.
Yeah, it's community raised because it's raised from other poetry gigs and stuff, and it's not like you just put on that one gig a year and that's it. You've got stuff happening daily and on all different levels, from like half a dozen people reading at a cafe to Slamalamadingdong, which is a 70-80 person gig sometimes, and especially during the bigger events of Slamalamadingdong.
Yeah. Oh, we sold out. We had 200 people at May's Grand Slam, and then there was people messaging me for tickets for like a week beforehand because we'd sold out. It was crazy.
And Slammer, tell us about that.
Well, Slammers technically a gig that's independent and separate from Melbourne Spoken Word. Melbourne Spoken Word promotes and supports a bunch of gigs that aren't run by MSW. They're run by various independent gig owners, or like kind of a poet runs an open mic here and will promote it. So Slammer was started by a Canadian poet called Michelle Alina Dabrowski, aka MC Fembot, and she still is part of running Slammer. But a couple of years ago, I became one of the co-producers and took over running a lot of what Slammer does, especially the kind of facilitation of the slam. For those that don't know, a poetry slam is basically a poetry competition. You have 5 random judges selected from the audience. They give a poem that goes for 3 minutes, a score out of 10, drop the highest and lowest scores to remove any biases from enemies or people who want to sleep with you or whatever. And then you get a score out of 30. Slamalama is certified and affiliated with Poetry Slam Inc., which is a proper official body in the US that represents poetry slams, mostly in the US, but some in Canada, and I think there's a couple in France and London as well. And we're the only Australian team certified by this body, which means that our slam has to be official and shit, which means we have a proper 3-round slam.
Yeah,
we have
man, official and shit. Super official and shit.
And we have an annual season, and the top 3 from each of those slams gets points and goes towards qualifying for the Grand Slam. And then we have a Grand Slam in May, and that the top 4 from that Grand Slam become our National Poetry Slam team, and we get to go to America and take this team, and they compete against around 80 other poetry slams in the world, which means we have 4 slam poets every year. You get to go to the US and showcase their work and network with a whole bunch of rising slam poets in the US, and some big name slam poets like Rudy Francisco and so forth.
Yeah.
Which is pretty sick.
Gnozle looks like he might want to say something here.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna, in terms of big name poets, 2 years ago, Dana Smith was at the National. I think he got runner up. His team. He's recently performed with Macklemore.
Oh, really?
I don't know if you. Yeah, I don't know if you remember his what was it called? A White Privilege 2. Remember that rap?
Oh.
Yeah, he Dana Smith and I forget who else toured with him, and they did some spoken word pieces in the middle of his set.
That's pretty cool.
Was it the National Poetry Slam or the individual World Poetry Slam? Because there's 2 of them.
Oh man, I think it was the national one.
Yeah, because do you know what slam or team he was part of?
No, I'm not sure.
Yeah, because the National Poetry Slam, you enter as a team rather than as an individual poet, and so sometimes you'll get up and perform one of your solo pieces as part of your team or your slams team or whatever. But a lot of the time, it's like these group pieces which are super weird and challenging to write. Yeah, so our team is currently like working their ass off trying to write stuff like that.
Links to fundraising for Slammer will be in the description.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of links to a lot of other different stuff will be in the description. The Melbourne Spoken Word and the subreddit and all of that.
Yeah.
Ben, as someone who sees a lot of poets, like sees a lot of performing poets, and is very involved with the community, what is one piece of advice you would give to aspiring poets who want to do it, maybe not full time, but want to take it more seriously, maybe make a career off it in the long run? What do you think the first step is?
Your first step is to perform in somewhere, like to perform in an open mic, and totally commit to it. Don't apologize on the open mic before you do your poem or anything like that. You get up, you do your poem, and to realize that like starting out via the avenue that I started out with, which is like open micing a lot until you get booked for a gig, basically. It's a two-way exchange. So you're getting up and you go on open mics, you're performing your poems, you're getting people to listen. But you're also spending a lot of time listening to other people, so you're not like performing your poem and then going, oh, I'm done, I'm going to go have a cigarette out the back for a couple of hours. And like the listening as well as the performing is very important. The reading, like going home and reading poems, even if you're a spoken word artist, reading stuff on the page as well as hearing stuff is super important. And just kind of consuming as much poetry as well as producing as much poetry is like how you start out, I think.
Well, that's why I initially joined the subreddit and the Discord, because it's not like daily that you get stuff, it's hourly. And you can, if you've got questions about it, you can ask the poet. And it's kind of like an open mic in that, you know, people are looking at it, and if someone has an opinion about it, they'll probably share it. Or that's what I mean. You get audience feedback, I suppose. If no one's saying that they like it, then you might need to improve some bits, and you can ask. You can there's people in there who are reading poetry every day and can tell you, like, you know, this might need improving, or this is a little preachy, or whatever. So you think just getting amongst it, just go do it, just commit to doing the open mic. Don't apologize, just write the best you can write, and then just go do it. Just find a gig, find an open mic, and see what happens.
But also it's like going to open mics or reading poetry or consuming poetry, how you do, you work out what poems or what styles and what approaches you like and don't like, and kind of can experiment with. I'd also recommend like kind of experimenting with different ways of writing. Maybe you'll try, maybe form writing or rhyming or whatever isn't for you. Maybe slam isn't for you. Maybe, I don't know, like more experimental stuff isn't for you, but maybe try it out a little bit, see where you fit in and what you feel comfortable producing. Like for me, it's about
find your style.
But also tapping into the way of expressing yourself that I guess becomes the most, for me, becomes the most unhindered. And sometimes that changes. Sometimes working in a different style or writing in a certain way taps into something where I'm not like holding myself back, or I'm not like self-editing, or where I can like, where I feel like I'm truly expressing something that I can't express anywhere else. And often that's, for me, that's like stream of consciousness type stuff, or kind of like absurd word association. Weird shit. And I got to find a way to tap into that. It doesn't work for everybody, but you got to find some way of expressing yourself where you kind of using your own authentic voice.
Nice. Yeah, so finding your style and then refining it, making it better as time goes on. I had a follow-up question, but it's gone from my head. So with this podcast, we would, if we didn't have guests on, what we would be doing is doing poetry readings from the server with author permissions, of course, or having a few people come in and do like an open mic sort of thing. But for this first episode, I kind of wanted just to keep it controlled and have some people on. We're also going to be trying to get some outside people with skills that they can share to help people grow as a poet. So we might get some people to talk about how they wrote their book, or how to make a YouTube video, how to promote yourself, that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then to fill in time at the end, we've got classic poet discussion. And something. So I want to tell a story about how I was on the Discord and we were talking about Poe, because Poe always comes up in a poetry Discord. And someone mentioned that Poe died. He was raving mad and then dropped dead in the middle of the street. And I told my mum about it, and she's like, "Oh well, let's fact check that." And it's kind of true, because he was raving mad and walked into the middle of the street and collapsed, but then later died in hospital. But while fact checking that, we found an interesting piece, an interesting bit of information. Rufus Griswold wrote a biographical article of Poe called Memoir of the Author, which he included in an 1850 volume of the collected works. Griswold depicted Poe as a depraved, drunken, drug-addled madman and included Poe's letters as evidence. Many of his claims were either lies or distorted half-truths. For example, it is now known that Poe was not a drug addict. How crazy is that shit? My whole life, I've been like, yeah, Poe used to smoke hella opium, dude. He was just blasting opium all day. And it's false.
Yeah, I think there's a stereotype, not just for poets, but writers in general, of the drug-addled alcoholic, miserable. I think a lot of it actually stems probably from Poe and probably from this. Even though it might not be true,
Yeah.
I just think it's sort of crazy that so many people will be like, oh, I know all about Poe. I've researched the hell out of Poe, and he was a depraved, drunken, drug-addled madman. And then instead of just listening to the stories, it's like, if you look into it, it's just not true. I looked up it's called Griswold's Memoir, but the actual article is R.W. Griswold, Death of Edgar Allan Poe. Oh wait, no, that's the title of this page, not the title of the entire article. I think it's The Death of an Artist or something like that it's called. Death of Edgar Allan Poe? No? Okay. It's something really basic. Link in the description. And it's very, very smart how it's written. It builds him up, and it's like, Poe was a genius. He was even in his teenage years, his poems were beyond genius. But then it also goes on to say, he would wander the streets talking to himself as if trying to talk to spirits that no one else could see. So I think that's pretty interesting. It's also signed Ludwig, but of course there is no Ludwig. It's R.W. Griswold.
I find it interesting that those kind of urban myth type stories about artists, or not even urban myth type stuff, but the kind of backstory of poets is part of the reason people get obsessed with it. When my English teacher read Daddy by Sylvia Plath out to me, I was obsessed by the poem, but then she kind of told me a bit about Plath and how she killed herself by sticking her head in the oven and stuff, and suddenly she became super interesting. And I was to teenage kids, it was you get obsessed with that shit and then you look it up. So whenever you turn up to uni years later and they talk about the death of the author, and the point is, it's about the poem, it's about the poem itself, it's not about the poet, you got to take the I voice out. I'm that's bullshit, because everyone gets obsessed with the backgrounds of poets. and like their
Yeah.
backstory and like how their poems are connected to their history or whatever.
I just think it's like, I think it's interesting that we create stories, like even if there is no story. If the
I think
writers
people
just
like that. You know,
yeah,
people like having this weird, crazy story to talk about.
I think it's
The
kind of
meta
like
narrative.
Eminem. Like Eminem's lived a crazy life, but when he was first starting out, he was just like a kind of nerdy poor kid. He wasn't too crazy. Like he wasn't really that hard,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean. But
Yeah.
but he got marketed as like this gangster white kid when he was just nerdy.
Well, you build this persona, right? I think it's basically what finding your voice kind of means, right? Is like you create this type of persona that you write as. It's not just because your own voice is just, it's not unique, right? It's not interesting. You create the interesting something, I think, or at least that's how I view it. Because when I write poetry, it's not my everyday voice. It's not how I talk. It's not how I act, right? It's a constructed thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and same thing with like performance or spoken word. You're out there performing, you're acting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, definitely.
You're finding like a something that you become and you create it, right? And so even if it's not real, like to you, I think the audience member, the reader, has to like connect with that persona in some way, right? There has to be some person behind the poem connect with.
Yeah, and I think
That's
maybe like that can talk about why I guess like spoken word and slam and stuff like that has been taking off a lot. Like there's lots of articles at the moment about
Because you can make characters and display
yeah.
them to people.
But even like you just connect with other people on the stage and like
Yeah,
you
definitely.
get like you think about the popularity of Rupi Kaur, they're like maybe it's just simply a fact of like young women of color see Rupi Kaur and they're like, oh, she can become big, I can become that's inspiring to me, I can make something of myself too. So they get interested in that. If you see someone like yourself on stage or performing or whatever, people connect with it more. Whereas if you read it in a book, kind of just off the shelf, sometimes that's not immediately obvious to you.
I think having a mythos is good. Having a character behind the poem is good in the short term for getting it out there and for connecting to people. But
yeah.
As we have seen, the character isn't always correct. Like it's not always what you see is what you get. And I wanted to bring that to people's attention with Poe. Like,
yeah.
you know,
Once you're dead, you kind of have less control over how you depict it anyway. So
dude,
Yeah, the literal death of the author.
yeah,
the piece, like the article's huge. The article's long, and he's like, "Oh, this hastily written obituary." I don't think it was hastily written. I think it was sitting in. I think it was waiting until the death, just to bring him down and slander him. But in the end,
Yeah.
it kind of made
To
him
the
a
mystique
more
of it.
interesting character.
yeah.
Well, talking
Interesting
about
stuff.
Plath too, it's pretty interesting because she was like the character is her, like that was her real life, right? That was the point of that whole movement of poetry. Is like it was actually just her speaking directly, right? I think that's kind of the appeal of that, and like Bukowski, all these people whose personas was just their real person, and
Yeah,
it was kind of real and fucked up and kind of miserable. But people are drawn to that, strangely.
yeah. Humans are fucking weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I think of like like I'll go to like an open mic or something, and I'll just be sitting there like hearing like miserable poem, like miserable as in it makes me feel miserable. Not that it, it's bad. It's a
I
good
love it though.
piece, but just poem after poem, and they're just heavy and miserable and depressing, and it's just like it's just a parade of misery, and we enjoy this, and I'm sometimes confused by it.
Mm-hmm.
I love that
The fact
we've had daily prompts that are like, write a happy poem, and 50% of the responses is like, how? It's like, how do I do this?
how?
Samantha Slupsky, who's a slam poet from Kansas City, who recently toured Melbourne with us. She was the headline act for the close of our Melbourne Spoken Word Festival. She came here and toured with us and ran a workshop. It's like, I can't remember the exact title of it, but it was like Joy is a House. Joy is a house you built, and her thing was that she writes all these slam poets about being sad and trauma and stuff like that. Like in Kansas City, her poetry nickname is the Queen of Sad. And so she ran this workshop to kind of counter that, I guess, in that she was trying to challenge people to write about joy in an impactful way. So like sometimes people write poems about happy things or joyous things, but they seem kind of silly or like trivial or kind of like throwaway joke poems. But she was trying to get people to write about joyful things or like really joyful moments in people's lives that kind of make the same impact that like a really sad poem or a poem about someone's like really fucked up trauma, like have the same impact. And it's really challenging. And we sat down, we were like trying to construct these poems and use the metaphor of like a house, and like if your house is joy, like what's in the house, what do you furnish it with, what's the house built out of, who do you let into the house, that kind of stuff. So we played around with that metaphor, and then in the last part of the workshop, she asked people to kind of express the most joyous moments in their lives, like just go around the circle. And that was kind of really hard for some people, which was really interesting how like even if you think about it, you could probably find something, but to be put on the spot and think about the most joyous moment in your life is really fucking tough for poets, I guess.
Yeah, more difficult than asking them what the top 10 most depressing things in their life are, right? They've probably written about those already.
Yeah, and they've talk about them regularly, so they can like list them off or whatever.
Even my positive poems still have that like negative guise to them. Is guise the word I want? Like my most joyful poem is still a metaphor for death. So it's interesting that we I think we connect with depressing shit a lot more than we connect with joyous stuff. Like I think because it sticks around longer, like in our psyche, the sad stuff sticks around longer.
Yeah, and there is the struggle, the struggle that people like emote with. Because if you have someone that's just happy, like imagine a movie where someone's just in a good place and everything's going well, and that they just live a good life for 2 hours, that's not very interesting, Whereas
there's no conflict.
Something terrible happens for 2 hours, that's either really funny or really depressing, but it's interesting. I don't know why that is, but I think people connect more with the downs and the ups.
But also, if you think about someone who comes into a bar and like tells you how great their day was, everything really great happens. I met this amazing person. She makes me the happiest person alive. And you're like, you self-indulgent little fuck.
What a blowhard.
Bragger, blah, blah, blah. And so like maybe there's this psyche about like
bragging.
If you tell people you're happy, like people think you're just like being self-indulgent. Whereas like everyone talks about being sad, and that's fine.
Well, for a good note to kick it off on.
Yeah.
Astiz, did you have any questions that you wanted to get in before we finish?
Yeah. I wanted to ask because the topic of rupee core came in, so
Oh yeah.
to blood barricades
Mhm.
that our line breaks poetry.
Or our line breaks poetry.
Yeah, a line breaks poetry. I got a good story after you give your
Yeah.
answer.
I would judge it individually by the poems. Like sometimes you can definitely see when you read a poem, you're like, oh, they just added line breaks to make it into a poem. And it's not really that poetic. I'm not personally that much of a fan of Rupee Cow. And I don't really connect with that much.
No one here is.
Yeah, we're all, I think.
Yeah, she's very popular, right?
Yeah.
I just find it interesting how lots of people talk about the death of poetry, but I guess for some people, Rupee Cow is an amazing example of poetry, or they find her inspiring or whatever. And if people really like her, I think it's great. Maybe from that they'll read her stuff and go, oh, I do like poetry. Might use that as a way to access other forms of poetry or read other poets. I still think it's kind of positive, even though.
So you're trying to say that she can act as an introduction towards the actual poetry.
Yeah.
So her purpose is to just be a gate, I guess.
Yeah.
So
just the attractive model behind the actual product. Way to objectify her. Yeah?
Sorry, say that again.
No, I said way. I said way to objectify her. Yeah.
So I got a story about when I was writing poetry on Tumblr, and so it's just because it was like I didn't know where to post anything at the time, and I didn't want to post it to my friends. So I made a Tumblr because that was like the only place I could think of that would sort of accept poetry. But I got very not senile. I got very angry very quickly at looking at the poetry tab, like poetry search, and seeing just atrocious stuff. And there was one girl who posted it, like she was just doing line breaks. She was just hitting enter sort of whenever she felt like. It wasn't like the same syllable count in each line. It wasn't the same word count. It wasn't like, it seemingly had no reason. Like mid-sentence, she would hit enter, hit return, and just continue the thought. And it's just like, sort of like, why did you do that? Why not just finish the sentence, then hit return? And I brought her up on it. I reblogged it, and I was like, hitting enter doesn't make you a poet. And here's why. Your counts are seemingly ambiguous. It's not like you're trying to hit a certain amount of syllables or words per line. It's just whenever you feel like you put it in. And then I got death threats. I got death threats from people who were like, if you don't like it, then don't watch it. Like, if I catch you reblogging this shit again, I'll fucking kill you. It's like, Jesus, 12-year-old girls take poetry seriously.
To me.
Yeah.
Well, I have
crazy.
an entire parallel story to this as well. So when I started seriously writing poetry, I submitted everything to Tumblr. My blog is still active there. And I thought that the poetry community would be a bit intelligent, but the same
it's
experience.
A lot of emotional people.
A lot of emotional and misguided, pretentious people thinking that their emotions have any face value just because they write them down. I mean, they don't understand that to convey the emotion to the other person, you have to put a lot of work in your writing. They just write, I feel sad right now. The sky looks lonely without no stars.
Yeah. Well,
Something like that.
I think
But
we'll
I've
wrap it
not
up
gotten
now.
death threats yet.
What was
I'm
that?
still on Tumblr. Not, I said that I'm still on Tumblr, but I've not gotten any death threats yet.
Don't critique any 14-year-old white girl's poems seriously.
I
Just
think I'll
don't
get a
do it.
lot of backlash. I'll get a lot of backlash.
Yeah, I
I'll
got
just
well,
be
I got death threats.
outcasted of the entire thing. That you are not allowed here. You don't respect our feelings.
All right. Well,
I think that is one of the major things within this Discord server and the subreddit as well, where I think Gnozle points out very effectively that critique the poem and not the poet.
yeah,
I think
because we've got a lot of click through in the subreddit and the Discord. So there's a lot of people who come in and they're really proud of what they just wrote. They're really, it might be one of the first things that they've written, and they just want to put it out there and see what people think. And then they end up getting told that this isn't good or whatever. And of course they're going to react badly to that because no one wants to hear it. And they might not have been
So for
expecting it.
every first poem that I read from a person, like the first poem that I ever written, the first thing that I always say is that this is a decent attempt. I when I first wrote, I did not write like this, so you definitely have a shot at this. It is kind of bordering between it's not good and yet motivational, so I guess that works.
Yeah, you have to kind of what's the word? No, I can't even think of the word. You have to kind of give feedback that's like appropriate to the person you're giving it to, like some.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I can take
as well.
hella criticism. If you're like, this is shit, like, what are you doing? I'll sit there and I'll be like, okay, if you can tell me why, I'm happy to hear that. But but there's some people who
I mean, the only
just
way to
cannot take
improve
it.
is to get criticized properly, regardless of how much your feelings are hurt. Because that's how I have personally grown. I've gone to competitions where I have written the poems, and half the time I won't win the competition. Half the time the judges won't even talk to me, thinking that I don't know. But then slowly, some people gave me a few feedback saying that this is where you should work and this is how it should go. You have added too many things, you left this. So in the moment it hurts thinking that it did not work out as planned, but slowly as you get perspective you understand.
Especially if like it's your first time and you just trying to put stuff out there and get a feeling back from the audience rather than trying to get like hardcore critiqued. Anyway,
I think that for the first poem they should not get the entire feedback, because if they're interested enough then put another poem. I think the second poem deserves more attention, because if they're interested enough then come back.
We don't know though, because it's just people posting. Anyway, I think we need to wrap it up because we're getting close to almost an hour here. So thanks for joining us, guys. Astiz, just from the Discord, a regular who's around. As you can tell, he's pretty into it for the feedback and such. Of course, we've now hit 1,000 people on the Discord, so there's a lot more variety, and through these podcasts we'll see more and more people as they come on as guests and such.
Cool.
There's one thing I want to say. I mean, it's kind of a serendipitous thing. So I listen to podcasts while commuting, and I typed in poetry in the search bar. Did not turn up anything, just from a poetry reading podcast from the poetry magazine, and then nothing else. But
well,
immediately today,
he runs a podcast. Well, it doesn't run, but has one.
Oh, we have one episode.
Yeah, but then
you have one episode.
Okay.
Okay.
But I typed in poetry and I did not get anything. If you can give me the link or the name of the podcast.
Yeah.
My podcast is Melbourne Speaks Poetry.
And ours hasn't gone up yet, so but it'll be posted on the subreddit or the Discord when that
Okay.
goes up.
Okay.
I'll
Thanks
make
to
an
our
announcement.
guests. Oh, sorry, Gnozle, you go.
Oh yeah. We'll post it on subreddit when it's done. And thank you, Ben, for joining us.
No worries.
Yeah,
Pleasure to
definitely.
chat with you guys.
Yeah, you too. Good luck at competition this year.
Yeah,
I don't know when
thanks.
it's happening.
In August. I just booked my flights last night, so we're pretty excited.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Cool.
Thanks for tuning in for the first episode of of ROC Poetry Podcast.
Thanks,
bit of a shit
Yay.
show, but
Yes.
Yeah.
you know,
It was good.
episode
We'll
number
fix
one.
it in post.
Fix it in post. Yeah. Cool.
right.
Yeah. How do you finish a podcast? That's always the hard thing. Thanks for
You
tuning
just
in, guys.
fade in like a cheesy.
Oh yeah, you do some
Tune.
Follow us on
common
Twitch
license
and
music.
YouTube.
And then you add in later. Thank you for tuning into the OC Poetry Podcast. For future episodes, subscribe to iTunes. Yeah,
If you liked our podcast, please donate us on Patreon.
yeah.
Our Patreon page is not there, but still donate us on Patreon.
Hit like, hit subscribe.
you can just add my Patreon link if you don't have one. I'm fine with
There'll be links.
Guys, merch out soon. Merch out soon. Please, link in the description below.